Good morning, everybody. Today we have as our guest Mr. Ben Winchester. He comes to us from the University of Minnesota Extension Service. He is one of the top researchers in the United States when it deals with rural education. Before we get started and introduce Ben to our members here today, we would like to share some announcements with our Executive Director, Mike Heilman.
Morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. I see a few of our board members are on board. Appreciate them always coming on board with us for these meetings. Also, Brant and a few other board members are here. That's great. I don't want to take a lot of time with announcements, so I'm going to mention one thing, and then maybe at the end we can do a few more announcements too, Steve. But the only thing I really want to mention is grants in place of the Rural School Collaborative. Elizabeth Kruger, a teacher at Fort Ransom, is the new grants in place winner. She's going to be doing some interviews and some historical documentation, and maybe we can even visit a little bit more about that at the end. I really want to give Ben as much time as possible and as much time for you to ask Ben questions. So with that, let's go right to Ben, Steve, and let's let him get started and let our folks ask questions at the end of his presentation. Thanks for being here, everybody.
Ben, I don't know if I need to introduce you to everybody. Like we said, we've got a small group today with the weather here. I see right now that we have 12 participants. If there's any questions that you may have directly and don't feel like you want to turn on your mic, you can put them in the chat and I'll get those to Ben, or Ben will read them himself. He's pretty proficient when it comes to doing this online. He's done it a number of times. So I'm going to give a little bit of how Ben and I got together. I met Ben probably in 2016 is what I'm saying. I was on a national meeting looking at that rural school teacher shortage that we had, and we were talking as a group, a grassroots group that developed the Rural School Collaborative, about teacher shortages and developing what we called a rural teacher corps, which was recruit to our schools / communities leaders that had to deal with school leaders in rural schools. And so with that, there was economic development director from Watertown, South Dakota, who said, if you've never met Ben Winchester, you got to give this guy a call, because he really gets after Patrick Carr's book, The Rutgers Researchers, not only the poppers, but also Patrick Carr on his hollowing out the middle. So if you've ever had a chance to read that book, it's about the great American brain drain in rural America. And he did the research in the state of Iowa. And so that was the start and extension where I first met Ben, because he had talked about what we call the brain game. And how do we turn our rural communities out of these dying places that all the media things that were a kind of a ghost town into a thriving community, and keep that whole thing going, including our schools. So I gave Ben a call and I said, since that time, he and I have got to be really good friends. He's presented a couple of times at the National Rural Education Association. We've had him at the summit last week. He was with the new group that we have at the University of North Dakota, the iRead group, which is dealing with rural economic equity, development, and education and job support. So Ben, we'll let you get started here. He's going to do a little bit of what he's coming from, and then kind of we'll let it go. When we have 20 or so participants, we'll kind of let this go into a group, and then we'll bring it to a close here. So we don't want to take more than an hour of somebody's time. So Ben, I'm going to shut up and let you talk.
Hey, everybody. Nice to meet you all. My name is Ben. I work for the University of Minnesota Extension. You probably know Extension is the 4-H people. I'm actually not in 4-H. I'm in a different sliver of Extension called Community Vitality. So we do economic development, community development, and really my life's work has been around what I call rewriting the rural narrative. And the premise behind all of my work that you'll potentially hear about here is that the narrative we use to describe our small towns is terrible. A lot of times this is based upon things that happened like 100 years ago, like the decline of agriculture and that our small towns are dying. Well, I'll just say this. I'll start right now and say, how did we arrive at a time during which we have such a negative narrative about our small towns that we're dying, the lucky few escape, there's nobody left, the grain, all of this, which is true on that side, like, right? But at the same time, I can't find a home to buy. Like, we're dying, but I can't find a home to buy. Like, this doesn't make sense. So ultimately, right now, even when we talk about housing or talk about labor shortage, which you all know, we've been in, especially on the education side, and especially in our rural communities, been in this labor shortage for 15 to 20 years. So if you could just mute yourself if you're not muted. Sorry. So essentially, like, we've been in this kind of labor shortage for a long time, but the analysis I do, and I'm not going to get into my full like PowerPoint here with all the data behind it, but our homes are filled, folks. Our homes are filled, and it's very hard to welcome in new people when there's nowhere for them to live. So what I've done, I look at a couple different things. One is migration. I look at who's moving into our small towns. And I've shown a very consistent pattern of people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s moving into 99% of counties in this country since the 70s. And it really kind of filled up our small towns. And I call this the brain gain trend. And this goes against that narrative around, the kids are all flocking away, which is actually true. There is a brain drain, but that doesn't mean your town is dying. Like, and so when Steve talked about that car and the car book around the Halloween out the middle, the implication around the Halloween out the middle title is that when you lose your kids, that there's nobody left, right? Your town is being hollowed out. And my research is like, man, it's clear there are people in their 30s and 40s moving in. They have occupied our homes since the 70s. And a lot of those were baby boomers. So today, the more interesting point is you don't have a labor shortage, you have a housing shortage. It is virtually impossible for you to recruit someone in when they don't have anywhere to live. So I know the NREA, the National Rural Education Association, they've got pointers in all these groups where if you're an educator, you want to find a job across America, go to the website. So let's do that. Let's go to the website, go to a small town in Iowa, and there's a superintendent job or whatever, a teaching job there I'm interested in. But then you go to realtor.com and there's nowhere to live. So you move on to the next job. Like, this is the stopping point right now. Our housing stocks have been filled. So now it's like, all right, why are we in the position we're in? So basically, I'm going to step back. So we have had this brain gain trend. People in 30s and 40s moving in. They're diversifying the economy. We had found we've done newcomer surveys. 20% of newcomer households were telecommuting before the pandemic in some way. It doesn't mean they're doing it full time, which means broadband's important at this point. So these people have been moving in. You've been diversifying your economy because of these people. You've been also starting new nonprofit groups, which keep going up because they want to do something social, but they don't want to be in the Lions Club, right? And like the old timer groups, they want to be in the new groups. So essentially, like, I go into communities and look at marketing materials, and you're not marketing to the new people, you're marketing to yourself. Like, you're marketing to things that only you enjoy. So we have to actually go out of our way to find out where these people are. A lot of times in schools, you can see new people right away because hey, there's a new kid in my kid's class and there's their parent. But our research is real clear. Just half of newcomer households moving into your communities have kids. So like, seeing one household with kids, the low hanging fruit, there's going to be another household that you typically may not know that they're even in town because they don't have kids. At the same time, just 1 in 4 new people moving into your small towns are from there. Put the other way, 3/4 of new people moving into rural America are not from there. So like, I lived in Hancock for a long time. I couldn't even imagine moving into Hancock. I already knew some people in the area because I lived there before, but I didn't grow up there. But if I didn't know anybody, and I've done interviews, thousands of interviews and focus groups with newcomers, and it is anxiety ridden for these folks moving into a small town and they don't know anyone. And meanwhile, you could be pumping gas next to your new neighbor and you wouldn't know it, because we don't have all these opportunities for social engagement. How do you even know about new people moving into your town? I mean, right now it's winter. It's like dark when you get up in the morning and dark when you get home. You wouldn't even know somebody moved in across the street until the spring. And then you're like, oh, there's a new person. What happened to John? Like, I don't even know where you went. I mean, tongue in cheek here, but the idea is we don't really have good welcoming experiences. We make tons of assumptions about who these people are. Like, oh, Jill, you're new to town here. Do you want to sit on the EDA board? Like, I just treated you like a warm body. Or you hear things like, oh, hey, Frank, why would you ever move here? Like, what are you saying through this narrative? So I'm a big proponent of ensuring that you've got a positive narrative in your town because you're not dying. Your homes are filled. If you were dying, I should be able to find tons of homes to buy, but I can't. And why is that? Because rural is durable. We're still here. Rural is desirable. In fact, 54% of Americans said they prefer to live in small towns or rural places. Why don't they? Well, our homes are filled, number one. But part of this is they don't believe they could. Of these interviews I've done with urbanites, a lot of folks will, when I say like, hey, would you move to a rural area? And they'll be like, I'm not a farmer. It's like, oh my gosh. Okay, this is how pervasive that narrative is. And there's actually interests that want to keep rural equals agriculture, right? As an interest group by itself. But in reality, the top industries in rural America today are education and health services. By far, they make up a third of all our jobs. Ag today makes up less than 5% of your jobs or income in a rural community. And you know, it used to be that as ag goes, Main Street goes, but you don't want Main Street to be dependent upon the variability of agricultural income. It is wildly sporadic. So regardless, what we've done is we've shown that you do have a diverse economy. You may not have a diverse economy in Hancock, but when you put 3 to 5 counties together, you actually have a really diverse economy. So when we talk about recruiting people in, you have to do more than just show off the job, because in a tight labor market, all your jobs look generally the same and any differences can be trained up on. We also know that the pay and the benefits aren't even a major consideration. The research has been clear for 20 years that that is not the differential in recruitment and retention. It is academic support. It is like we had Cuba Rushford School District in New York during the pandemic. Instead of spending COVID funds on students, they spent it on a mental health professional for their staff. Just a small example, you know, about how are you supporting your staff. But at the same time, we know from our brain gain research that, especially in a tight labor market, what's going to differentiate one job from another when they go to all these different communities is everything but the job. So is the community welcoming? Are they engaged? Are they inviting? Do they show respect for me and my family? Do they care about where my spouse is going to work? Do they want to make sure I'm involved with the fishing groups? I mean, it is like, do they care about my interests? Truly care about connecting me? Because we're doing more than recruiting people to work. We are recruiting the future resident of our town. It is more, and if the typical kind of argument for people to move to your town about why would anybody want to move to your town is because they have a job. That's the industrial recruitment model, right? You're going to bring in a business and they're going to have a job, and that's the only reason people move there. Just 41% of people said they moved to rural communities because they had a job or a job offer. It is all of these other things that kind of dictate where they're going to end up. And they end up drawing these newcomers. We found to draw this huge triangle about where they want to live. And they look at parks and homes. And eventually they look for a job. But that's not even the primary reason why they're looking. So this is turned on its head, folks. Over the past 20 years, we've even shifted from a work-life balance to a life-work balance because life is first. This is like paramount, and economic developers don't know what to do with this because, right, it's just not as simple. Let's just get the job and get people here. Why don't these people want to take my job? Because your community is not welcoming, because you don't work with your neighbors, because you've got no hope being driven in your local narrative, right? This isn't a big pity parade, folks. If you have a negative narrative in your town, I'll tell you, nobody moves to your town for pity. Nobody's going to be like, oh, Jill, I feel really bad. Your small town lost their grocery store 28 years ago. I'm here today to help you out. Nobody says that. Nobody cares. No, to be blunt, nobody cares where your towns have been when they're moving there today. They are moving to our towns for hope and opportunity right now. They see it. And so a lot of times for me now, what's the role of the school here is lift up the voices of these newcomers. You want to know the best marketers of your community? The people who just moved there. Because they're like, oh man, I love this place. And sometimes your kids right now are growing up in negative narrative households every day. And I call this, so this is a term I use, negative narrative households. That you've got these negative narrative households that your kids are in, and they of course are being told there's nothing here for you. Our best days are behind us. You need to get out to succeed. And even sometimes for the kids that return, they're called failures. Like, oh, you couldn't make it in the broader world. Like, oh my gosh, this narrative is terrible. You can be positive narrative writers because not only do you connect the old and the new populations, but you connect families with a broader community. There are very few other institutions in the city in the county, in the region that do this. You connect the old with the new populations. And you know, this is, as I'm a sociologist, I love studying groups, and especially for schools, because everybody in town is forced to interact. You can't just differentiate yourself based upon race or class or income, like they can in a lot of these urban areas where a car will take you from one high income area to another, and you never have to see anybody else. In a rural community, you're forced to interact. And this is why I love looking at how dynamics of change happen in our small towns, because we are forced to make these decisions. You all know this isn't easy. You all are forced to bear the brunt of a lot of these divisive and critical, aspects of societal change. But there's opportunities here to actually lead the conversation about where our town is going and not be a receptor for the complaints. And so in many ways, you are, but in many ways, I say build the army of the willing, writing your own new narrative going forward. Don't worry about the folks that aren't willing to tag onto your narrative. Just move forward, because these new people moving in love your place. It is pretty amazing once you start collecting these stories. So I'll end here pretty quick. But so two things. One is, one of my favorite things that I see schools do is have a community supper for the newcomers. And so again, because you cross all these boundaries, that we call it the best $150 ever spent. And it's a newcomer supper just for the newcomers, not for all the existing population to gawk at all the new people in town. But the number one outcome out of this supper, because we ask people, like, stand up and say your name and who you are and what you like. It's like, hey, my name is Ben, here's my wife Tara, my two kids Calvin and Truman, and I like to fish, I work on computers, and I like to play tennis. And then there's always somebody who's like, oh, I'm gonna find Ben, I love playing tennis. Like, oh, this is great. You don't need to organize social life for human beings. We are social by nature. You just need to provide a platform on which that can occur. It is really that simple. So I've always really loved school districts solely for that cross-jurisdictional approach, very positive. We're talking about the future here. We're not hanging our hat on a past narrative where you've been. You're preparing kids for what you are today. So now the last thing I'll say is, right now our housing stocks are filled, right? A third of rural homeowners are over the age of 70. Another 45% are baby boomers. These people tend not to have kids. 75% of our households don't have kids. Pretty much, some of the trailing boomers, the younger boomers, may still have kids in their household, right? But ultimately, we've got a larger percentage of our homeowners that will guaranteed not have kids than ever before. And why is that? Because we had seen this pattern coming, right? You see in these demographic kind of things, they talk about the snake, and the baby boomers are the big bubble. And then there's Gen X, right? Like me, which nobody cares about. But then millennials come in right after that. So, right, you got the baby boomers and the millennials, but we've got all these baby boomers. And 10 years ago, it was like, oh my gosh, all these baby boomers are going to be moving out of their homes over the next 10 years. Right? Because typically in the past, historically, once people hit the age of 67 to 70, they move out of their home. And they move out of what home? Their family home. Their 4-bedroom, 2-bath place, right? That they raised the kids, and now they're done. They would move out into apartments or in with family, multi-generational stuff, whatever it was. But what happens when people move out? It provides space for people to move in. Well, today, and I want you to hear this is my key point right now. Today, this generation is staying in their home longer than any other generation ever has. They are actually not moving out. And if people don't move out, you can't welcome anybody in, because there's a finite number of homes in our community. So it's not a labor shortage, it's a housing shortage, in my view, completely and utterly. But now imagine over the next 25 years, that 75% of homeowners that don't have kids, right, are older, they are actually going to die. We have to talk about this. They're going to die and move out or move on or whatever you want to say. But what happens when you substitute that household out? You're losing a single or a 2-person household, and you're bringing in, we already know from our newcomer research around the brain gain, people are moving in, half of the newcomer households have kids. I actually see when you substitute these households in, our rural population's going up because they're going to be bigger. It is multi-generational housing is the way forward right now. And I say, and it's anyway, there's a whole nother housing presentation we can get into, which we're not going to get into now. But it is how do you then have an advantage to recruiting someone? You better have an in with housing. So we kind of say the best place to find a home to buy is to visit with your seniors after church. This is one of the best places to hear about change as it's slowly happening. So really in our state demography, we call it the slow trickle. It really is. You can't grow your population. We have all these ideals around our population needs to grow. Well, actually, your population is still going to decline because you have all these 1 and 2 person households that are going to slowly trickle, especially the 2 person that change into 1 person. But then we have these complaints locally. Our local employers are like, I don't like housing, we need more workforce housing, but we already know that's not a path forward. There's no builders, and even if they do, it costs more to build the home than you're appraised to have a lot of time. So building new is not an option. So my main line right now is you have no shortage of workforce housing. It's currently occupied. So we actually advocate for models around building patio homes, independent living, because most developers actually don't even know that this is an option. We had somebody in Otter Tail County in these 3-city cooperative kind of area. I had presented one May. I was like, oh, there's 75% of your homes are baby boomers and older. And there was a developer there. And he was like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. I should be looking at transition housing. And I don't mean continuum of care. I'm talking about a continuum of life before you get to assisted living and all that, where the people go to die kind of stuff. Because the seniors are like, oh, I talk about moving. I want to go where the people are going to die. It's like, no, I want to talk about like patio homes or independent living. So you go visit the kids for 2 weeks, not worry about maintenance. So anyway, in Otter Tail County, I presented this data in February or March, came back in the end of the summer. And there was a developer who's like, well, I heard your stuff and I put up these patio homes, 2 2-bedrooms and 2 1-bedrooms, and they sold the moment I broke ground. And then I put up 4 more, and then those sold the moment I broke ground. I had no idea this was a market. Why did I not know this was a market? Because all your housing studies talk about is workforce housing. And my argument is you've already got it. It's currently occupied. The trend is this current senior population is not moving out. So we need that. And this is, so anyway, I think the implications are clear. I'm not going to get into depth because this is a ton of people work to do. So you want to have an advantage, find housing. We've heard about school districts that bought homes in town to use as this temporary transition housing for new staff as they come in, because they're guaranteed not to find a place right away. And then you want to give them enough time to actually see what the market is like and where they would like to live. But also we need to know, there's so much here. You need to work together, because sometimes people aren't going to live in your district, right? And you have to be okay with this. We already know when you look at if you're interested, give me a list of all the zip codes in your school district. I'll see how well that matches up with inside your district of all your staff, right? So you've got people commuting in and out. Now it becomes imperative that you communicate and collaborate with your neighboring districts. So if we're bringing in new staff, they may not live in our district, and we have to be okay with that. We have to get over this parochial attitude that we're going to be competing with one another, especially on the school district side, because all the newcomer studies that we've done show that people don't care. They don't compare one district to another. They just see rural districts as the opportunity for their child to be seen, to participate. Like rural school was what they want. It's not like Morris versus Chicago, Alberta. They could have cared less about that. It is more about like, they know their kid's going to be seen. They're going to be part of a district in which their kids are going to be looked after. I mean, there's all these things that you guys know about. The same reason why you're probably there in the first place, right? It's the same reasons that people are looking for. And we find out that these newcomers have a lot of the same values that we do. They're not entirely different at all. They want the same things. They want peace and quiet. They want justice. They want liberty. They want freedom. They want, everybody wants the same things. Sometimes we just prioritize them differently. So I'm going to stop with that. Like I've talked a lot here. So questions or comments, or just follow up on, do you have ideas? Like so we call this resident recruitment. So let me know what you got.
I've got one, Ben. I'm never short of questions. When I moved to Lisbon in 1993, a conventional federal loan, we used to call those FHA loans, on my salary, because I was more than 30 miles out from what I call a urban center, that being Fargo-Moorhead. And so I'm 70 miles out. My loan capabilities, or my cap, was about $30,000 to $40,000 less than the same income if I was in Fargo, West Fargo. Has there been any movement by the powers to be to subsidize that a little bit, so that people that are doing well can purchase a home differently? Because they're looking at resale, and that's one thing bad about housing, is if you're a developer in a small community, let's say for example where there's an oil boom going on, and all of a sudden the bottom comes out of the oil field, you can't give your house away.
Yeah, I'm really not sure. I don't look at boom bust cycle communities at all, just because they're episodic and sporadic and not really part of the system, I guess. But really, the policy side is super interesting, because the policy side is all about workforce. And so we're always trying to transition the arguments from workforce to senior housing. So actually, when the Minnesota State Legislature had a bill that was talking about enhancing or supporting workforce housing in our rural communities, we ensured that we had a little angle in there that we could actually be building senior homes, because when you move seniors over, you're actually opening up that supply. You're actually building workforce housing by building senior housing, because that's the straight line argument. So we actually had our development commissions like very interested in trying to ensure the language on the policy side was crafted in a way that you could still do that. So I think there's other pieces of this too that are more broad, that nobody really cares about your housing stocks in town, because they're privately held, right? Steve, I'm not gonna tell your mom what to do with their house. Like, why would I? This it's a private asset, but it's a public good. That home that your mom is in is a house. It's a house that's a home for you now, but that house was a home to someone before. That house should be a home to someone in the future. And actually, so when we look at the condition of our housing stocks too, a lot of times the people that are in our communities are eligible for these home weatherization programs, but the people moving into that home are not. So then maybe we should, like, again, because nobody at the community level cares about your housing, like somebody needs to kind of look over the landscape of your homes beyond your HRA in Section 8. They're the ones like, oh, you want to talk about housing? Go to the HRA people. Like, no, we're talking about overall, the whole like stock of our housing. What condition is it in? Because if we don't have a good condition, there's nowhere for our future labor to live. There's nowhere for wealth to live. Like, so then it comes to having a conversation with our seniors about what you need to do. So I'll talk a little bit. So I say right now our seniors have a policy of best intentions. And that is, I'm going to live in my house forever. It's not really a policy, right? You can't make decisions upon that, but this is the reality of it. Like, I'm going to live in my house forever, which leads to them like putting on a ramp and updating the bathroom with handicap stuff. And then literally a year later, something happens. They're like, I got to move out. And now their kids are trying to sell the place, or you got to figure out what to do with it. And then the realtor is like, oh man, we can't do much with this house. You got knob and tube wiring in here and you can't even get insured on that today. Plus you have peeling paint and you can't get a first time home buyer loan program. Yeah. Well, I mean, that aside, but you can't even gain eligibility for a first time home buyer. So meanwhile, the senior now is stuck with this. I just spent $15,000 updating the bathroom and putting on a ramp. And now they're looking at another 15 painting the home and updating the wiring. And we're making choices. We actually have large programs to keep people in their homes. This age in place strategy is actually inhibiting our ability to churn this housing over. We are spending tens of millions of dollars on what is a livability expense. Those things, that handicap ramp, that's not an equity builder. That's a pure livability expense. And it kind of annoys me personally to think that we have all of these incentives to keep people in our homes and we're not thinking through the bigger picture. There's a cost to this. There's a cost to keeping people in their homes. So that's my point here is I don't have a lot of policy solutions. I just know that even when we have programs to try to update our homes, people don't take advantage of them because they're too proud sometimes in our rural communities. But again, nobody cares about the overall housing stock in our community. We only care about certain ones. So it's a privately held asset, but yet it's a public good for me, and always trying to make that conversation, that argument up. Like, we should all care about our home. I care about Steve's mom's house because I want that to be a home to someone in the future, but nobody generally cares about housing. So.
Yeah, and there's
Ben, I've got a question for you. So is there a point where small is too small? Some of us are in, I look across the board, and some of us come from extremely small communities. And at some point, do you have a leadership drain because you just simply don't have enough leadership in that community? And we're talking to school leaders here for the most point. Is there a point when small is too small? Is Knox, North Dakota, where I'm from, too small?
Nope. No place is immune to interest from people wanting to live there. It is like crazy. Because again, I think there's all the implications here that you have to be like cool and have high amenities and all this. Well, you actually don't need to have it all because we live in these huge regions that I call living in the middle of everywhere, right? It goes that negative narrative is you live in the middle of nowhere. But actually, when you map out like how far people go out and shop and eat and play, like it's these huge playgrounds. You're in the middle of everywhere. So really, how do we talk about succession? So I talk about we talk about business succession, but I talk about leadership succession. So just so you all know, Steve and Mike, you know this, but North Dakota has the highest demand for leadership in the country. There are more governments and more nonprofits per capita in North Dakota than any other place in the country. In which on one side, it's great that you've got all these opportunities for social engagement, but on the other side, you're pretty tapped out. So how do you take on more? How do you take on something new if you need to take on a new initiative when everybody's already involved in their groups? So this is the super high demand around leadership. But ultimately, it comes down, do you have a leadership succession plan? Are you like, hey, a new person, you just need to learn how we do it around here? Like, that's not very productive. But really, I talk about how are newcomers, how do you allow newcomers to make a mark on the community for themselves? So I give the example, my own personal example, when I moved into Hancock. And like a week after I moved in, there was a knock on my front door at like 8 o'clock at night. And there was a guy there and he was like, oh, hey, nice to meet you. I know you moved into Amy and Jason's house here. And it was, who lived there before, because it wasn't my house. It was who lived there before. You moved into Amy and Jason's house here. And, nice to meet you. My name is so-and-so and I live right over there. And he kind of points to the house down the road. I was like, oh, this is great. I'm actually kind of being welcomed into town. It was actually pretty nice to have this. And then he's like, well, you ready to join the Lions? And then he said nothing. So my answer can be nothing except yes. So I get the yellow coat. I'm like in the Lions Club. When I was young, I didn't have kids. I wasn't married or anything at the time. I really didn't they were all older folks, I don't know how to say it more kind, but they were older. I really didn't have a huge affinity. And basically I got to the first meeting and they're like, oh, here's the 5 things we do every year. Which one do you want to sign up for? It's like, I'll collect eyeglasses, I guess. Like, I don't know. Like, it was really like, there was no consideration for my interests, my skills, my anything, right? So how are we going to succeed our communities when we don't recognize who these new people are? We don't recognize what they're interested in, what their skills are. And then it becomes important, and not to say that nobody should join the Lions. It's the Lions shouldn't have 5 things we need to do. It's like, hey, here's our 4 regular things. Do you have an idea for how you can help us achieve our mission? Because a lot of people have different ideas about how to achieve things. And do you respect people in how they do their work? This is the crux of change, that if we don't have real kind of discrete leadership succession programs, it's going to be happenstance. In North Dakota, you've already got so many groups per capita. Your demands are already higher. So you should be talking about how do we not compete with one another? You have a limited number of people. You have a limited number of dollars that people are willing to donate. Like, you're competing real heavy right now. So on one side, I kind of say, I'll just end with this. That's kind of interesting because you have so many groups. It reflects the social nature of the upper Midwest. And I say that, really, rampant individualism got us to our rural communities, but community keeps us there. We can only get so far on our individualist attitude. So I'll just stop with that, Steve. Yeah.
My question has to deal with leadership. You hit upon that a little bit on the summit we had last on the 1st with UND, but times are changing. When I was recruited to come to Lisbon, it was basically told to me that you are going to be a member of Kiwanis. You are going to go to the golf course on Thursday night, and you are going to be on the economic development group, and you're basically going to do all of that community leadership things that are required of you. And that's a big burden to hold, and you're still running a school. So we're all educators here, and we were seeing a lot of resignations already this year in small rural schools across the state of North Dakota as superintendency. How do we do that leadership thing? Because there's not a lot of people in especially in North Dakota legislature that feels very sore. They don't take any pity on superintendents. Let's put it that way.
Right. There's no shortage of demands upon leadership and upon rural leaders. There's just so many things we have to shoulder. It is important though. You become these mavens or connectors between the groups. It doesn't mean you have to do a lot. It may be symbolic in many ways, but it still represents the ability for your community to see one another, to respect one another across all these bigger jurisdictions. And it doesn't take much, but people, so like the more you reach out, the more people are going to reach back into you too. It's kind of related to, I'd done this survey of rural pastors probably 6 years ago now. And we had a couple questions in there about community engagement. And one of them was like, how often do groups in your community utilize your church as a community asset, for whatever, youth programs, whatever. And I think it was like 51% of pastors reported the community was using their facilities. And we thought that was actually kind of low. And then we looked, there was another question about to what extent have you been going and attending other meetings across the community? 54% of pastors said they never did. And they're the ones that are like, hey, nobody's ever using my place. Why doesn't anybody know that we can use our place? Because you don't go out and let anybody know. Your doors are open. Nobody's going to walk into your door unless they're invited in. So like the same thing for the schools too. Now, schools for me are still the avenue where you can do, it can be very symbolic still, but you can engage community education to do kind of these community suppers. You've got a lot of kind of programs in your purview that you don't have to do all the work. You just need to be the connector and the symbolic interactionist between all of these groups. Because when groups feel the energy around the school district, more people sign up to do things. We know this. If you find collaborations with bicycle groups, or on the leadership side, especially, the biggest shift has happened away from place-based groups and into interest-based groups. So it used to be the Hancock Community Betterment Club. Well, people aren't in that group anymore. They're in the West Central Minnesota Bicycle Association. And that bicycle association is like 14 counties big. They're biking all over the place out here. They're not just serving Hancock. So how do you then know about these regional groups? How do you invite these groups to be a part of any other initiative you want to create? But sometimes you can be the lead narrative writers. You don't even need to do the work. You just need to have that voice that ensures that you've got a positive narrative in your community. This is the framing device even that all others use. So if you don't give into that, don't give into the negative narrative, because you're not dying. You can't even say that enough. Like, we're not dying, our homes are filled. Like, stop talking about how we're dying. Stop using total population as your infatuation indicator for success. Total population doesn't tell you anything. Your homes are filled, but the homes have fewer people in them. So, sorry, I kind of rambled there at the end, but it really was about the involvement pieces. Reach out, and then people will reach in too. You need to build the kind of that systems in place of interaction to cross those boundaries. Again, when I talk about people of all age, race, and gender have to come to school and interact. This is the convening aspect that schools can take on. It doesn't have to be a lot of work, but it can be very symbolic at times.
Ben, this is more of a comment than it is a question. But I go back and look at my youth and say, what did they do for me to make me want to participate in my community? So many times I think schools need to start developing leaders while they're in school and make them a part of the civic and commerce and have them, some input. Otherwise, what are they really there for?
No, I think it's interesting. So the Center for Rural Entrepreneurship, they have a larger community development program they do in small towns. But one of the things they do is they ask juniors and seniors, like, hey, if you move away, do you think that you'll return? And like, don't ask kids what the future holds. It's zero predictive value, really. But imagine, like, if you're a junior or senior, and in community A, 40% of the kids were like, oh yeah, if I leave, I'll return, 40%. But in community B, that number was 80%. What's the difference there? What's the difference between those two towns? This is real data that they've got. Some towns, 80% of the kids are like, oh yeah, if I move away, I'll come back. They have a positive narrative. They're engaged with local businesses to see that, even agriculture is highly technological. Like, it is not all these antiquated notions of what we've got. We have a diverse economy. We're highly technological. We've got broadband, not everywhere, but the narrative can't continue to tell us you have nothing. There's not a divide between you have everything or you have nothing. It is, we generally, especially at the regional level, do have everything. Our town may not have it. We need to transcend that argument away from that parochialism about our place to look at how we fit within the region and complement each other, because that's how people live. Our county boundaries were drawn during the time of horse and buggy. They don't reflect how people live at all. I mean, it might have a river or something on an edge, but like it reflects no natural delineation aside from that. So school districts cross those boundaries. This is why, again, I talk about boundary crossing all the time, whether it's social boundaries that people have, that schools can cross those, or actual geographic boundaries that people have. Other questions or comments? People have ideas, or what you working on a recruitment side? Interested in hearing ideas.
So Ben, I've told this story before, but back in 1996, I was living in Garrison and we did exactly what you said. We knew we didn't have housing in Garrison and we sold stock and we built some housing, transitional housing for people. It wasn't retirement, it wasn't assisted living. It was a place where a widow or widower could move out of their home and leave housing. So it can be done in small communities. Garrison's an example. There's others like that too. Yesterday, I was at the State Student Council convention because my nephew is, he is a manager for the largest YouTubers in this country. Guys by the name of Mr. Beast, Preston, people that they post a video, get tens of millions of hits. And he spoke to the State Student Council. One of the kids got up and said, "Can you get Mr. Beast on the line?" My nephew Reed hit the phone. Mr. Beast came on. That place went nuts. If you have had kids at State Student Council, you got to see that. That is something. And he said to him, "Will the next creator of YouTube information that is going to be hit by tens of millions come from North Dakota? I'm waiting for one. I'm from here. When are you going to do this?" So my question to you is, are we marketing to young kids what young kids want to do, or are we trying to sell them the world that we live in?
The latter. Like a lot of times I comically say
How
that.
do we change it?
Yeah, so like I do this exercise called living in the middle of everywhere, which I'm actually, so I'll give you an example. Let me see if I can find this here. But essentially what we do is we pass out a map. We did this in this Cuba Rushford School District in New York, is we hand out a map of the region. You go about 3 hours out from your central point. You go about 3 hours out. In one corner of this, you put your age. In another corner, you list 3 to 5 of your favorite assets in the region. So hold on, I'm going to try to find an example of this here real quick. And then, so what you do on this map is you put a star where you live and an X where you work, or vice versa, and then draw a boundary around how far in the past year did you go to shop and eat out. So you end up with this, we call it the middle of everywhere. I'm gonna bring this up here. Hold on 1 second. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Oh, can you give me sharing permission there, Steve?
Yeah, while he's pulling that up, I would challenge those of you that are online to ask your student council kids about presentation and what they thought of that yesterday, because kids are looking at work differently than what we look at work, and ways to make money, and we need to understand that and welcome it.
Right. Yeah, I'll find a different one actually. You got that there, Steve? I'm gonna pull this up here. Sorry, I can't find it. Let me, my bookmarks are a mess right now, apparently. So I don't know. Here it is. Okay, we got it. Nope. You got me sharing there, Steve, or not? I'm going to put a link in the chat. Sorry, Steve, do you hear me? Oh, you're muted. Oh, okay. So
I'm sorry, Ben. What happened is if I do that, I'll share it because it stops the recording.
oh, right. Okay. So anyway, part of this exercise, though, is people draw these boundaries around how far they go to shop and eat out. All right. So imagine now you've got, yeah, this is the one. So scroll down there. Well, I mean, part of this argument is even here's McLeod County. Every day in McLeod County, like thousands of people commute in, and every day 9,500 people commute out. Again, the county boundaries mean almost nothing because people live in between. So anyway, what we did is we did this virtually for one exercise here. Can you stop right there? So this is where McLeod County, you can't really see it, or if you could zoom in on that a little bit, Steve. Let's do this. Well, what we found out, so what you draw is all those boundaries you see there are how far people went out in the past year. So you see that some are smaller, some are really big, some went to the north more, some went to the south more. So the idea here is that people have their own defined ways of looking at things. There, zoom in, right? Up, two more, up, there,
Right
two,
there.
right?
Hit your
Yeah.
plus button.
Yes, there we go. So once it kind of cycles through and starts over, I mean, it gets really messy, but the point here is, right, as people kind of draw their boundaries, everybody's got a different boundary. Now, the other piece of this exercise you don't see is, so you've got these pieces of paper, people draw their boundary around it. On one corner, it asks their age, and the other, it says list 3 to 5 of your favorite assets in the region. So in that, you're like, there's a brewery 2 counties over. There's a park we like to go to. You have to name real things you do. So what you find though, okay, so everybody see that? All right, we're good, Steve. You can stop sharing that.
Okay.
So essentially what you do is you end up with these regions, but now more importantly, so we've done this before. Imagine you get 100 responses in a room. We did this in the Cooper Rushford. We had 180 responses of all the staff in the district filled out this map. And then you sort them by age, okay? So you've got 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds, kind of around the room. And as you walk around the room, you notice that people's middle of everywhere in their 20s, 30s, 40s, it gets bigger because you get to recognize more things in your region. You kind of go further out, right? 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and then 90s, and then your dot kind of goes away, right? I mean, so essentially though, what you also get, so you not only do you find that the regions get bigger and then they get smaller at the end, but the assets that people identify up in that corner are vastly different. The 20-year-olds are identifying vastly different things than the 50 and vastly different things than the 70 and 80-year-olds. But meanwhile, I like to go into small towns and I look at your marketing materials. And you know what? I can almost always tell who created those, because you're not marketing to strangers, you're marketing to yourself. I can almost always tell. How do you collect data? How do you collect data? It's simple exercises like this. And so how do you know when something new is out there? But this now feeds a ton of different things. So imagine you did 200 of these. And so I've got a workbook for the Cooper Rushford one we worked in, where we've got by 20-year-olds, all of the assets that the 20-year-olds identified and all the 30-year-olds. So now if you're recruiting new people in, and I'm like, hey, Jill, welcome to town. Here's, what are you interested in? If you can name off a few things, I can go back to that master list and be like, oh, here's a dozen things in our region that I may not know about, but appear on our middle of everywhere exercise. So again, how do you recruit anybody when you don't have any similar interests to that person? You still want them, but how do you get out of your box to know how to connect them socially with what's in the region? So this becomes a real important vehicle, because part of this is, who are your frontline narrative writers? Another thing you do that I like to do, I don't like to always do it, is go into gas stations and ask the gas station attendant, hey, what's fun to do around here? And the number one answer you get is nothing. Because you might have like high school kids there that are living in negative narrative households. And like, this place sucks, they got to get out. Well, I mean, come on, these are like frontline narrative writers for you. You better really think about what that's saying to a stranger coming into town, and they're asking people on your front lines, your hotel, motel, gas station, grocery. You got basic questions, and your narrative will dictate their perception of this place being a place they would ever want to return to. So this becomes pervasive and important. So how do you collect data to answer that question? Hey, what's fun to do around here? Like, oh, you're in your 80s. Let me get my list of like older people things. Like, I mean, you have to delineate this somehow, because it becomes real clear in the data that the interests of the younger people are vastly different than the interests of the older people. How do you answer that question if you have no data? And I'm not an older person. I'm getting older, but like, how would I know what your interests are without asking you? We need to quit treating people like warm bodies. We need to actually come to understand who they are, because when we recruit in the right way, we don't have to redo retention. This is the issue. Recruitment and retention are hand in hand. If you've got retention issues, it's probably doing recruitment wrong. Or your community is not very welcoming, which then impacts recruitment. We do know that only if when the respondent said, like, if for those that said the community was not welcoming, just 44% of newcomers say they're going to be there in 5 years. So less than half. So now this is where it's everything but the job. I keep going back to this, right? In a tight labor market, it's everything but the job that matters more. How are you connecting people socially, to leadership, to opportunities? And again, not just like, hey, Jill, you're new in town. Do you want to sit on the EDA board? Like, I'm treating you like a warm body. Like, why would I even think that's appropriate? So anyway, I'll just stop there.
So Ben, in other words, in Lisbon, we should say that we're X number of miles from the lake country so they can go to their weekend homes.
Sure. I mean, you've got to have lots of different narratives. Lots of people have different narratives.
There's a lot of people my age that have places in Minnesota. And so as a border state and border county to Minnesota, they would pick a place according to how far away they are from the Minnesota lake country.
Right. No. We also, we do know there's a narrative piece here too around lake people that a lot of times locals are like, oh, it's just the lake people. They're only here on the weekends. There's a negative narrative around lake people, right? But then we also know that 54% of the lake people actually want to move to their lake home when they retire. And then they turn into full-time residents. And then we commonly hear the lake people say, I'm never invited to anything around here. I'd love to go to school events. I'm not even considered a part of this town. Like, I've been ridiculed for 20 years and I had my, weekend home and now I'm here full time and I'm still not considered here. So there's that there on the recreational side too. There's that.
Ben and Steve, this is Jill. I just have a quick comment, which really resonates with me in terms of planning for succession, right? So as educational leaders, when we know things are working, one of the markers is we can step out and things, the organization is performing flawlessly, right? So I think one of our challenges in North Dakota going forward centers around diversity. And I'm not saying necessarily gender diversity, racial diversity, diversity of thought, diversity of experience. What I find in terms of our educational leadership cohorts or experiences here across the state in many different areas, there's a lot of similar thought, right? A lot of similar characteristic. And I think that's impacting us in this state to fill those gaps, to encourage new and different and residents from other areas, Minnesota, South Dakota, across the country, to come to this great state. That's been a real challenge. I'll reflect on that. I had an opportunity as a part of my assignment on the state board to lead a couple of higher ed presidential searches. And we heard that from candidates across the country. They would ask our search teams during the private Q&A, how do I fit in here? What's this going to be like for me when you, the interview team and the constituent groups they were meeting with, said, we value family, relationships, and we value a local custom and generational experience, right? And that was a real challenge to navigate. So I think part of what I'm thinking about is how do we bring together those rich traditional experiences which make rural North Dakota such a wonderful place, but recognizing that that's not everyone's experience and that may not be our future. So just a thought.
Yeah, I commonly hear, so there's an idea that culture is this one kind of static thing. You just need to learn about what our culture is here or whatever. I hear this all the time. So I had presented in Montana once to 24 different sites, and there was 3 communities in general. I keep coming back to, when are these newcomers going to learn about your culture? And when to learn about our culture? And I was like, well, first of all, I don't believe that you have a culture that's one thing. The culture that you have today is different than the culture you had 25 years ago and vastly different than the culture you had 100 years ago. You went through, right, ethnic, just ancestral change where, the Germans were moving into our Scandinavian town here now in the early 1900s, or the Protestants were moving into our Catholic towns. I mean, we went through all those changes before, but it wasn't as apparent because now people's skin colors are different. I mean, it's visually apparent. You couldn't always tell before. So then I get this common response, and take it for what it's worth, that people just need to, we would accept anybody. We would welcome anybody, and we're not racist. And I say, well, you haven't had a chance to be. Like, let's talk about this. Let's talk about what this really looks like when you have change coming into your community. Because right now, and I'll just say this, the lack of diversity on racial and ethnic categories that we have in Minnesota and North Dakota, especially rural areas, is not an outcome. It's not the result of all these diverse people saying, I'm never moving there. Our homes are filled. And what happens when one house gets trickled in and trickled out? Like we know right now during the pandemic, a majority of home sales are through social networks. It is like you have to know somebody, you know, our housing stocks are filled. How else can anybody cold call one of our towns? Again, like that thing about how do you find a teaching job through the website and then they go to realtor.com and there's no homes for sale. Like I'll just move on to the next job. It's been a socially connected housing supply for 4 years, for 3 to 4 years right now. So how do you get an in on that? So again, the lack of diversity that we've got, I'm real clear about this, that it's diverse, but it's like our demographer, it's a slow trickle. You can't just expect our communities to diversify over 10 years when their seniors never move out. Like literally, how do you welcome in anything different when nobody moves out? At the same time, I don't like the melting pot analogies at all. Because I believe we're a stew and we keep adding people into the stew and the stew looks different. It's been the stew that's been cooking for 200 years. It's the same pot, but it looks different. And we keep adding in new things and some things get taken out, right? So it is like, I got a slide very specifically to answer your point, which is newcomers will come to appreciate where you've been, but they're not concerned about it for the first year or two. Like it is imagine moving to a town of 300 people and you don't know anybody. It is anxiety ridden, folks. It is just the most uncomfortable thing when you feel like you need to melt in, that all of a sudden I need to learn how they do it around here. This is a terrible way of doing change activity in our small town. So this is where I am all about, you better know who that person is. Know what skills that person is bringing to your town. Respect them as an individual. I don't think I should be saying this, but like apparently we have to respect new people. Like, many times we have that narrative around these younger people are lazy and entitled and whatever. Well, hello, baby boomers. That's what you were called too. And now it's a vicious circle of negative language. And it raises the hair on the back of my neck whenever I hear this because it's not true. And now the research is showing actually these kids are starting to believe it. This is ridiculous. What are we doing to our young people? I can't even tell you how concerned I am about this kind of narrative of they need to be hard workers. Like, no, I don't want my kids to have to work as hard as my mom and dad had to work. Like, we have to really talk about what work life means in this world and in this society. We're not having these broader conversations, but again, these are the ones I am interested in, is the intersection of capitalism and democracy. And they don't work well together all the time. We're trying to do democratic things in a capitalist world, and they don't always fit. You guys are on the front lines of friction on that democratic side. With that, I just can't tell you how much I appreciate all the things that you've done for not just your kids, but my kids in our schools here. So this is why I've been really happy to work with Mike and Steve over the years, just to hear more about where the districts are. Because I am not, well, despite what Steve said, I'm not an rural education expert. I know my things about rural, but like the rural schools are just, you've got another area of research, but it's been a real good alignment for me, because the narrative is really part and parcel of the struggles you've had too around resident recruitment. So, but our homes are filled again. So kick your seniors out of their homes. I'm called the person who's trying to kick our seniors out of our homes. So just kick them out of their homes, get them some move over housing, and welcome in a new workforce. I mean, there's other issues on the educational side with perceptions of success in the educational field, right? Not just the rural kind of trend thing. So I just appreciate the opportunity to come and visit y'all.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, that last point is really true. It took me 3 years to get my uncle to sell his house after he was already in the veterans home. And then he thought it was worth about 100,000 more than it was because he hadn't updated it in 25 years. So those are really tough, difficult discussions with family members. Any closing comments, Mike, here?
No, just, I mean, thanks to Ben. I really appreciate your energy, your presentation, what you bring. Just tells me again that we need to spend more time listening to your thoughts and ideas, because I think they are very pointed at our rural communities and what we need to do to help people understand that we can thrive. We don't have to die.
So in January, we have Apogee would be our guest for this meeting. I don't remember right offhand what day that is, if it's the 16th.
I can look at my calendar, but yeah, we will have Apogee come on board, and a number of you are Apogee users, and they've got a couple of new products that they kind of want to let you know about. And They're a good sponsor of ours for NDSOS, so we'll have a representative from Aptigee here to share some thoughts with you about your website and how to get your message out, maybe as part of what we can take from what Ben is saying here today and putting it transferred onto your website.
And as always, if you've got any comments or suggestions for these meetings, it's just something that we brainstormed last spring during our strategic as board members, our strategic planning meeting about having these so that our membership could have some opportunities. We try to record all of these sessions, so they are available. I'll be sending it out to our memberships, and I put them on my YouTube channel when we're all done. So we'll put that out. With that, we'll call it a day. I'll stop the recording. If any of you guys want to stick around and talk, we can talk after that. So have a great day, everybody.
Anytime. You know, this is super easy to do. I don't mind doing this at all. It just
Perfect.
good conversation to have. Yeah. All right, Jill, nice to meet you too. Thanks.
Hey, Ben,
Yeah.
do you have a minute? And I don't mean to take over Steve, your meeting or Mike's meeting, but I do have a question and I can connect with you other ways. I am on a national steering committee for a rural education collaborative through AASA, and the steering committee meets this afternoon. So
right.
I would like to connect with you, but again, it doesn't have to be now or today. So
Yeah, no, our kids are coming home early today, so I'm taking the afternoon off. The snow is hitting here, so
yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
But otherwise, yeah, shoot me an email. My email is Ben W. I'm just gonna put it in the chat here.
Yep, I can see it behind you, so I got it. Yep.
Oh no, that's right. That's right. No, I do that on
Yeah.
purpose. Yes, I should know that.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm more than happy to connect, Jill. Please reach out.
Okay.
Yes.
I'll connect with you. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. All right. See you guys. Have a good
Yeah,
have a good Merry Christmas and have a good
Merry
holiday,
Christmas,
everybody.
Ben.
Right on.
All right.
Thanks, everybody, for being on board. Thanks, Steve, for using your Zoom and getting it all set up. Thank you to everybody, NDSOS members. Appreciate your membership. And look for our Zoom next month. We'll get
How's
it out
our
together.
membership doing, Mike? Are we up,
We're sitting
down?
at about 140, about 140. That's down a little, but I think we're down simply because we've got a few schools that just haven't paid their dues yet. When I look at the list of people who haven't paid their dues, it's schools that have been longtime members. But interestingly, we have some small schools that just they don't join and don't necessarily see the value, I guess, in joining. So that's a disappointment to me. And I try to convince them. But at the same time, our membership is solid at 138, 140 members. And I've got to get some information out to a couple other schools to get them on board.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's about 15 schools right now that have been past members that either haven't paid. And again, maybe their emails are going in the junk. I just need to make a phone call to those schools and their school leaders and say, hey, please come on board with us again. We want you as a member. We're stronger with you than without you.
So how does the legislative organizational meetings go? Part of any of that? You and Brant?
Oh, the organizational meetings.
Yeah.
Just some information back from them. We've got new leadership in both the House and the Senate, so that's going to be interesting. However, we do have some one of the changes is our good friend out in Mott, Shibley. He's gone from the Senate Education Chair onto the appropriations, which actually is probably a good thing for us for education. And I think Elkin out at Richardson, who has been vice chair in the Senate, will be the chair of the Senate Education Committee. And I think it's Hauge from Minot, who again is a friend of education, will be in the House side. So I think we're okay there.
Who's on the Senate side?
On the Senate side is Elkin, Jay Elkin.
Okay.
Jay, I believe, is from Richardson area. He's been on the Senate Education forever.
Sounds like an old bareback rider.
Yeah, he's a good friend. He's very good. So I think we're okay in both of those cases. The negative side might be we have a huge number, and I don't remember the exact number, but a huge number of new people in the legislature. And some of them are coming from that very conservative sect that believes that, dollars should follow kids, and vouchers and all of those things are positive. Private school funding, all of those types of things are things that we should be doing. So there will be some challenges. The governor made a statement. Also, I was at a workforce development meeting. Actually, it was a meeting of the K-12 Coordination Council, and Brant was there. I did not hear the governor's statement because I had to leave, but the governor then came in and spoke to the Workforce Development Council and the K-12 Coordination Council at the same time. And he made a comment about believing that the dollars should follow the child also. He put some qualifiers on that. But I think that's going to be a challenge for us in public education, is to continue to fight that battle where tax dollars should fund public education, not private education or homeschooling, just simply because it depletes the total source of funding that's there. And if one thing we don't need right now is a depletion of funding, when we're going to be competing with other tax entities, taxing political subdivisions to provide raises to our people. And if we can't get 5% and 6% increases in our funding, how are we going to give competitive increases to our employees? And not just our teachers, but our teachers and our support staff. If we're offering 1% and 2% and the other political subdivisions that we compete with for some of these folks are offering 5%, 6%, 7% wages, we're gonna struggle. So,
Yeah. Well, my social security just went up by 8.7%. So
yep. I
in
see Leslie
January,
just
so
came on
hang on to
screen.
your
Leslie
hat.
wants to talk.
Yeah.
Leslie, what are you thinking?
Here, let me, so I'm not walking. And I don't know if this has already been said, I apologize, because I just had stepped out for a minute. At our legislative focus group, Senator Shively talked about, rather than raising it to the point where there's fear of sustainability, looking at a cost of living bonus. But what he was talking about is just teachers. And of course, we all said, well, I mean, I have more ancillary than I do teachers in my building. And I can't run a school without cafeteria or bus drivers or custodians or anybody else. So I just wanted to, as you were talking about that, I just wanted you to know that that's something that they are discussing. So.
Well, and they need to hear that from us. And
Yes.
You've heard this time and time again. And it was said at the Northwest School Leaders, and you were there, Leslie, that it is important that our school leaders reach out to their representatives. They need to hear from you. They can hear from me, or from Amy Kopis, or from Amy DeCook, or from whomever, Nick Archuleta, but it means a little bit more. We can say we speak for the collective, but when they hear the collective individually respond, that helps. So
right.
spread that message in your regions.
And
So-
Shively was saying that he agrees, but he doesn't think he could get a bonus for ancillary through legislation. So his hope is that if he gives the teachers a bonus, then maybe our budgets
Can handle the rest.
handle the rest.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to make sure. And so now Northwest School Leaders I'm not sure at this point. I don't know that I can get that little room off of the Capitol Cafe. The Lobbyist Association might have to use it as a legislative session, but he's going to stay in contact with me. So we may have to request, from one of our legislators if they can get us some kind of a meeting room, or just meet off meet off the Capitol campus. But it would be best to be on the Capitol campus to have our meetings. So
I was the SANS president, State Association of Non-Public Schools, back in the late 80s, early 90s. We didn't want any of the state money. So where's this whole idea of the follow the money coming from? Is that a national form or what?
Well, I think there's a belief that if I'm being taxed to pay for education and I'm not accessing the public available education, then why shouldn't those dollars, just those dollars that I'm being taxed for education, why can't I spend them where I wish to spend them? And again, it's kind of the analogy that I don't want to use the public park for my kids to go play in the public park. So can I build a park in my backyard and use some tax dollars to do it? At what point do you fund all kinds of private things that are going to deplete from the public good?
Well, and that's how we
there are
get back
those
to
people that buy
segregation.
into that narrative.
And that's how you get back to segregated everything.
Yeah, but I can't see that. You were at a Catholic school in Bismarck. They don't want that state money.
They certainly wouldn't turn it down, but I don't think they always understand what they're asking for. So the response I'm hearing more and more from our superintendents and some of our school leaders that are listened to is that's fine, give them their money, but then they need to play by the same rules we play by. You have to take every child. You cannot turn children down. You must provide special ed services for the severely handicapped and multiple handicapped students that, are going to cost a lot of money and require special facilities that you're going to need to build and all of those types of things. So our narrative is, I think the narrative from the public school leaders has changed a little bit in that regard, where we just said, no, no, no. I think there's more of an attitude of that's fine, but then you can't call yourself a private school any longer.
Yeah. There's
So,
sure.
and Leslie's right. It creates a system of have and have nots. I'm really afraid of that, if we deplete the funding in public schools to the point that it becomes more detrimental than it is already, people will vote with their pocketbooks, and then the haves can select, private schools that they want, and the have-nots are going to be stuck with what's left over. And you see that in areas of our country already.
And the fact of the matter is that there are fewer and fewer taxpayers that have children in school.
Yep, that's true. And
So
the other concern I think we have
Sherlock
to
just put in here, he said this session should be in the October school board convention.
and we should have this conversation. Sure. Yeah. Well, and
So are you?
I mean, Ben Winchester's session should be in
Yep.
there. Sherlock, what are you saying? Yeah. I mean, we could certainly invite Ben. We've been working more as a North Dakota Small Organized Schools with the School Boards Association, simply because we kind of cater to administrators and then to school boards. So we've been having a conversation with Alexis over at the School Boards Association about, rather than running our own convention, that we run some breakouts and maybe even a keynote that comes from the Small Schools Organization. I think it would be great to convince the School Board Association to bring Ben in for next year's School Board Association and have him talk to the School Boards Association. What better group to hear his message than the school board members who also sit on the elevator boards and on the Kiwanis and the Lions and the community development boards in their community.
Can you kind of break the ice there with her?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think we've already broken that ice. They are very open to that whole concept of, we this last year, there were 3 of the breakout sessions. And again, they only have 1 day of breakouts at the School Boards Association. So if you think that 3 of the sessions at the School Boards Association were sponsored and organized and put together by this organization, so we've already got an inroad there, and she'd more than, I don't think that'd be a problem.
Okay, then I'd work on Ben. I didn't need the dates, and I could work on Ben to recruit him.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I did that a couple of years ago when I was still on the board. NDSA board, I got Al Pratt to come in from the NREA.
Yeah, so at this last school boards convention, the session on the University of Mary and their program, that was strictly NDSOS that got that going. The session that we always do, we've done for years with the North Dakota Center for Distance Ed because of the discount and the level of use that our members have, that comes from us. And then the other session this year was the Be More Colorful session with with Matt Chauncey and the Career Viewer. The 360 virtual reality headset viewing of
What
career
happened to
things.
him? You sent out that email and it was crickets.
Well, they're still working on what we're working with him, and we're trying to work on a state level funding with Matt Chauncey for Be More Colorful. Simply because the membership for our small schools to sign people up seemed kind of cost prohibitive. But in the interim, what happened was there were a couple legislators that reached out to him and said, you know, really should look for a legislative appropriation for this. So we've been working with with Wade Sick at the Department of Career and Technical Ed to consider including funding for that program for all schools in the state in his appropriation. Now, I know Wade was meeting with some legislators last week to talk about that because their budgets have all been sent in. And if there's going to be an appropriation for something like this in the Career and Tech Ed budget, a legislator has to come forward with an amendment to the budget. So we're working on that. And then you get into the whole procurement process and how much money is it and when does it got to go? You know, you got to put out a RFP, or can we just do it internally? So there's all kinds of jumping through hoops that's going on right now. So that's where that's at. And we'll see where that goes.
Well,
More
I
than you
gotta
need.
let my wife get back to work, so she's
Yeah, yeah.
phone ringing, so.
All right. Well, hey, again, thank you. Those of you that are left.
And as always, I'll
everybody.
send out a meeting. I'll send out the recording.
Right. All right.
Get
Sounds
all
good.
done. All right, thanks.
You
Bye
bet.
now.
Take care. Bye, everyone.